Hey guys and girls, Nathan here, just for our weekly Tuesday night chat. Just waiting for everyone to hop online and hope everyone's having an awesome week. Yeah, got a lot of things to talk about today, and a lot of things to cover off on, and some interesting news that came out today as well. So, looking at just as everyone's getting online, just ready in case I have some trolls that pop online. Just as everyone's getting online, hey everyone, hopefully you're having an awesome week. Um, cool. Got a few things to talk about. First and foremost, the elephant in the room. We had interest rate news come out today at 2:30, and we may or may not have seen a um, may or may not have seen the rate cut. What ended up happening was today's rate cut decision. So today is the first Tuesday of every month. Every Tuesday, first Tuesday of the month, the RBA meets. When they meet, they discuss, what is going to happen to the rate cut decision. And today they met and they said no rate cut, right? No deal for the rate cut. However, I would have normally had predicted that we would have seen a rate cut today. For those of you that are avidly watching and are in Birchfeed, I normally share with you guys what sort of tools that I look at on a regular basis to determine whether we're going to see a rate cut or not. I've been very correct for the last 11 years since I've been following this method, which all went out the window in March this year. And I haven't reason as to why. Wish people would stop calling me. Got calls coming through as I'm doing a live here on Instagram. With the reason as to why, I will run through that shortly from an RBA statement, which they made this afternoon. And I've also got some other interesting topics. Once I run through all these topics, I'm going to, get to our topic of this evening, which is conversation on what I want to talk about, which is, building a large property portfolio of over 200 plus properties. Lots of things to learn along the way. Quite often people ask me, did I have a mentor? Who helped me? All that sort of stuff. I'll be covering off on that today. Did I have a mentor or did I not have a mentor? Things that I wish I had have known back in the day when I first started investing. Basically things that I wish I knew back in the day. So I just got sent this link. I find it fun, and I'm just going to play it. It's 1 minute. It came from Scott Morrison's LinkedIn. Someone sent it to me, and
Pass the laws to extend and expand JobKeeper. When the Treasurer and I announced this almost 6 months ago, what it was about was keeping Australians in jobs and keeping business in business through the worst of this COVID-19 recession. We're still battling COVID-19, and that's why we're extending and expanding JobKeeper, because we're going to continue to be there for you, helping Australians through the worst economic downturn we've seen since the Great Depression. But Josh, it's also about the road out.
It absolutely is, and the passage of the legislation today will give confidence and certainty to millions of Australian workers. JobKeeper's been an economic lifeline, today supporting more than 3.5 million workers and around 1 million Australian businesses. JobKeeper and its extension and expansion is a key part of our economic recovery and will give hope to so many Australians.
there we go. Since the greatest depression, right? And going back, 2 years ago, 3 years ago, we talked about that. The GFD. It wasn't the greatest financial depression. It was the global financial depression. Talked to be of biblical proportions. And who else do we have? Mr. Scott Morrison, reading and preaching to us all. Just interesting that they extended that. It's gone through legislation now, so now has confirmed that that JobKeeper will be extended until the 31st of March 2021, which would mean 12 months worth of economic stimulus packages to businesses, to individuals in all different ways, shapes, or sizes. That is just the start and scratch to the surface, right? We have a tally of money which has been printed this year. I am somewhere around that $850 billion worth of funding which has been printed to get us through the GFD. I mean, that word pandemic. But it is interesting to look at. So as we go to some of the other things that I've been looking at. So we've got, this is an article from the RBA. This is today's press release. For those that you want to go and look it up, it is in Birchfeed. It's just a media release from the RBA website itself. This is a media release statement by Philip Lowy. Low, I call him a Lowy because, you know, some Lowies out there. Monetary policy decision. So let's just read through this and entertain ourselves, because there was one key thing that we mentioned the other day, 6 months ago, 12 months ago, and I did put it in the mentoring program going back 3 years ago, and that would be something that the RBA would do when things really got to a low point. I would have thought that it'd do negative interest rate first. However, it is very evident today as to one of the controls of monetary policy and how they actually are controlling the monetary policy out there. So it goes on to read, at its meeting today, the board decided to maintain the targets for the cash rate and the yield on 3-year Australian government bonds of 25 basis points. It also decided to increase the size of the term funding facility and make the facility available for longer. So let's be very clear with this. If you have got this article, go and read it up. It is in Birchfeed. It is the press release from the RBA. When they say the term funding facility, this is in capitals. So this, when it's in capitals, it is actually the name of the thing, right? So this name, or this special project that's called, is called the term funding facility. It's not, you know, here's a car and put it in like little C. It's like car with a big C. So just be very clear with that. It is also decided to increase the size of the term funding facility. Increase the size, meaning that they're going to expand the balance sheet and buy up more assets from the market, right? So I've seen here from Harpreet, he said that can't believe how come the share market keeps going up and up. When do you reckon it'll drop significantly? When they stop manipulating the markets is when it will drop. But it goes on to read here, under the expanded term funding facility, authorised deposit-taking institutions, ADIs, so the big four banks, they are banks which take on deposits from people, will have access to additional funding. So let's just be really clear on that, right? Under the expanded term funding facility, capital T for term, capital F for funding, capital F for facility, authorised deposit-taking institutions, ADIs, will have access to additional funding equivalent to 2% of their outstanding credit at a fixed rate of 25 basis points for 3 years. ADIs will be able to draw on this extra funding up until the end of June 2021. This extension will ensure that all Australian deposit institutions continue to have access to term funding facility after the end of September. When the window for drawings under the initial allowance of 3% of outstanding credit closes, additional allowances associated with ADIs growth of business credit will now also be available until the end of June 2021, right? So the RBA is printing more money. There is more liquidity being injected into this system and more money flowing around, right? One thing that adds up to is inflation, right? That is going to be massive inflation to the market, to all markets. Goes on to read, to date, ADIs have drawn $52 billion under the term funding facility, and further drawings are expected over the coming weeks. Today's change brings the total amount available under this facility to around $200 billion. $200 billion, right? 200 billion is 20% of $1 trillion. This is nearly 20% of $1 trillion that they have printed, right, in the last 6 months and injected in the system for the banks. They say that there's not a lot of lending going on out there. There is massive amounts. There's actually a big backlog when it comes to the banks. Lots of people are trying to borrow credit and get cheap credit. It goes on to read, further details are provided in the company notice. It goes on to read, where are we? This will help keep interest rates low for borrowers and support the provision of credit, providing ADI's greater confidence about continued access to low-cost funding. They are buying up the bonds. They're buying up the bond yield. Goes on to read the term funding facility and other elements of the bank's mid-March package are helping to support the Australian economy. This has nothing to do with the economy, with the government, guys. This is the RBA.gov, which is a private corporation. We will get into some of this a little bit later. You want to know who is under the hands of the puppets of the Liberal Party, who is under the hands of the puppets of the Labor Party. It is the central banks which control this show. The amount of liquidity that is being printed will end up in the trillions. Globally, we have got tens of trillions of dollars worth of currency creation, which has occurred in 2020. And I will go on very shortly to show you what has happened in other civilizations where this has gone on in previous times. Now, so this goes on to say the package that was done in mid-March is helping to support the Australian economy. When I called this thing a scandemic, I wasn't talking about the health element. I wasn't talking about people getting sick or not. I don't care about the health aspect. That's not me to come in and judge, are people getting sick or not. When they are mopping the floor using this so-called pandemic, after they made a video and all these tests and trials and stuff as propaganda for this before it came out and came out on Netflix, right? Just go watch it, right? The dates don't add up. I'm talking about what they are mopping the floor with this with. I'm not talking about any 5G towers. I'm not talking about any lockdowns. I'm not talking about selling out the country. I'm not talking about anything like that. I'm just talking about what the central banks are doing in order to raise their agenda and mop the floor with this so-called scandemic that's coming through. This goes on to read, this is from the RBA website for those of you that are joining at the moment. It's in Birchfeed, go check it out later. There is a very high level of liquidity in the Australian financial system and borrowing rates are at historical lows. Government bond markets are functioning normally. They are functioning normally. Every friggin' company on the stock market is insolvent, right? These businesses are insolvent. They are kept alive. They are zombie companies. They are zombie companies, and it goes to say that it is keeping the bond markets are functioning normally alongside a significant increase in issuance. Right? The reason why these markets, the reason why these markets are going up so high is simply due to the level of money that's being printed from the central bank and injected into the markets. Over the past month, the bank bought a further $10 billion of Australian government securities, AGS, in support of its three-year yield target of 25 basis points. Since March, the bank has bought a total of $61 billion of government securities. Further purchases will be undertaken as necessary. The yield target will remain in place until progress is being made towards the goals for full employment and inflation. Inflation goals are going to run out of their hands. Going to be runaway inflation, i.e., hyperinflation. Globally, an uneven economic recovery is underway after a very severe contraction in the first half of 2020. Lots of business are never going to open up again, folks. Lots of cafes, restaurants, people that you knew in business will never be the same after this. This is a terrorist attack on the economy that we have seen in 2020. It goes on to read, the future path of that recovery is highly dependent on containment of the virus. High or rising infection rates have seen a recent loss of growth momentum in some economies. By contrast, in China, economic growth has been relatively strong. In financial markets, volatility is low and the prices of many assets have risen substantially. Very, very critical words came in here. Let's just go read that. By contrast, in China, doesn't matter, who cares about that, economic growth has been relatively strong. In financial markets, volatility is low and the prices of many assets where are we here? Prices of many assets have risen substantially despite the high level of uncertainty about the economic outlook. So they are writing in their press release that we have seen massive growth in asset prices, even though people are scared. This is called an inflationary depression, folks. This is why I called it a GFD. It is a depression which is inflationary. People are going to lose their money. Savers are losers. You have money in the bank account, you're going to lose your purchasing ability from it. It's getting worse and worse, and it's going to get a hell of a lot worse. We have never seen trillions of dollars worth of money printing like this in this country beforehand, and it's the first time, right? You're aware of it, take action, do whatever you please, but that's what's happening. And I'm turning very complicated words they're using here into very layman's terms. We go on to read, bond yields remain at historically low levels. The US dollar has depreciated against most currencies over the recent months. The reason being is that we saw the US currency rise going back 3 years ago when they were expanding, when they were contracting and going into monetary quantitative tightening territory. Now we're in quantitative easing. The US dollar is losing its value. Given this and higher commodity prices, so be very clear with this, right? Given this and higher commodity prices, the Australian dollar has appreciated to be around its highest level in nearly 2 years. Funny that we're printing money, right? And around the world they are printing money, and that is affecting the values of the currencies. The most important part of that is given this and higher commodity prices, right? So I talk about mining areas, right? I'm Mr. I don't buy in mining towns. I have been buying up for my investors over the course of the last 2 to 3 years in mining towns where everyone did their ass and prices fell by 10 to 20% of what they initially were selling for, picking up properties that used to sell for $600,000 for $50,000 and $60,000. They used to rent for $2,000 a week at 600 grand, are now renting for $300 at $60,000. And these are the markets which are seeing massive growth at the moment because we are seeing commodity prices. We were before the market. We wanted to see what was going to happen when those levers were being pulled. We were picking up the assets whilst they were cheap. Yeah? But very important, right? I buy commodities. I love buying commodities, right? A lot of people think, oh, Nathan just buys property and whatnot. It's a lot more than just that. That's why it's called B.Invested. Looking at the next part of this article from the RBA, in Australia, the economy is going through a very difficult period. Not really, right? Not really when we saw this coming. When we started to see the writing on the wall, the cracks on the wall, we were able to prepare for that. 3 years, 4 years in advance. People laughed at me. People said, Nathan, lay off the drugs, stop talking crap. Right? People said I was tinfoil hatter. They're now wearing a face mask or a nappy on their face. Yeah, just interesting. It's not that bad, but it does say it's gone through a very difficult period and is experiencing the largest contraction since the 1930s. Why, if we're going through the largest contraction since the 1930s, are we seeing the stock markets hit all-time highs? Why are we seeing commodities hit all-time highs? Why are we seeing gold at $3,000 an ounce? Why are we seeing silver prices rise straight through the roof? Why are we seeing all these things happen if we were like the 1930s? This is nothing like the 1930s. What occurred in the 1930s was very, very different fundamentally. What they didn't have last time is a money printer that went grrr, right? This time they do, right? And looking at, this quantitative easing, the way that they are manipulating the currency supply, there is writing on the wall as to what levers they are going to pull next and how you can sort of take advantage of that and what eventually will happen. And we will end up into a point of hyperinflation. In the 1920s and the 1930s, I'm going to get onto that a little bit later with reading some other articles and talking a little bit about our history. Right? And when I talked about the GFD, the ability for it to be of biblical proportions, I was not joking about how it was on biblical proportions. So we'll get to that shortly. It goes on to read, as difficult this is, the downturn is not as severe as earlier expected, and the recovery is now underway in most of Australia. Right? This recovery is, however, like to be both uneven bumpy with the corona outbreak in Victoria having a major effect on the Victorian economy. Well, the federal government can't just say all the business in Victoria are going to get stimulus packages. They're going to have to leave it for everybody out there. So with those guys in Melbourne, you guys are being the sacrificial lambs as your friend over there, Dan Andrews, is putting his foot in the door so the federal government can start throwing in stimulus packages for the rest of the country. Employment increased in June and July, although employment and underemployment remain high. The virus outbreak in Victoria and subdued growth in aggregate demand more broadly meant it was likely to be some months before a meaningful recovery in the labour market is underway. In the bank's central scenario, the unemployment rate rises to around 10% later in 2020 and then declines gradually to be around 7% in 2 years' time. Wage and price pressures remain subdued, and this was likely to continue for some time. Inflation is expected to average 1 and 1.5% over the next couple of years. They are predicting that inflation is going to remain at 1 to 1.5%. The stock market is inflated by 40% since it fell at the start of this year. Car sales have inflated. The price of your groceries have inflated. The cost of goods, materials, commodities, right? Inflation is much higher than that, right? When you need to get an iPhone made and it takes 20 grams of silver to put in that phone and the cost of it has gone up, that's where inflation is going. Josh, no, I don't think the Sydney market will crash because of this. I talk about this a lot, and yeah, I don't see that happening. I can see some posts here from people on Facebook. Keep the messages coming through. I hope everyone's well. Where are we here? The economy is being supported by the substantial, coordinated and unprecedented policy easing over the past 6 months. Who remembers that we had a Royal Commission occur like 2 years ago, right? When they were doing quantitative tightening, right? It was like they were mopping the floor saying, oh, it's all right, we're going to lock up all the bankers, we're going to lock up all these people that are doing bad things, and fuck all happened from that, right? Absolutely fuck all occurred from it. And here we are making it easier to get credit, cheaper credit, giving money to whoever will be able to take it now, right? Everyone was scared of the Royal Commission. And it goes on to read, fiscal policy is playing an important role. Public sector balance sheets in Australia are in good shape. Of course they are when you're just printing money in the tens of billions of dollars, the hundreds of billions of dollars, right? $1 trillion almost in the last 6 months. 6 months it's been since the scamdemic started here, and we started seeing people going to lockdown and, people putting nappies on their face and pads and whatever on their face, right? And here we are with $1 trillion has been printed. If you want to know why the stock market looks like it's going up, it's because they're just printing their way through this. When I predicted for the GFD to occur going back 3 to 4 years ago and came public with it, I said that there would be two things that would happen. We would either see the market fall off a cliff, or we would see them print through it. They have shown their hand and they are just printing straight through this. This will cause one hell of an issue in the future, and that issue will be hyperinflation, and we will see that play out over the years to come from this, right? Writings on the wall. Sorry for the swearing if you've got your kids watching. Looking at what else we got here. Indeed, fiscal and money support will be required for some time given the outlook for the economy and the prospect of high unemployment. In addition, support for the recovery is being provided by Australia's financial institutions, which is also strong balance sheets and access to high levels of liquidity. Of course it does. You just printed $1 trillion worth of money and gave it to the economy, right? Ain't the taxpayers going to pay this off? Everyone goes, oh, those Centrelink bludgers, they're going to get all the money, or, these rich people are going to get it from tax deductions, right? It's all coming from inflation. Everybody's on the same team. When you realize that everybody's getting screwed here, that's when the people will wake up. And it won't happen until inflation starts ripping people apart, and they'll be so brainwashed, indoctrinated, and dumbed down. Given their vaccine, they'll be like, they won't even be able to have mental capacity to think about this sort of stuff, and people will just be like, oh, it just happened. It was because of the corona back 10 years ago. But, it just happens, right? And that's what happens, right? People look back. People's memories are very short. Probably one of the strongest things that I've had in my life is a memory which is very, very good. And, hopefully, touch wood, it continues to be so for many years' time. The board is committed to do what it can to support jobs, incomes, and businesses in Australia. Its actions, including today's extension of the term funding facility. So just remember the term funding facility. Let's go in and have a look at that. I don't have that here, but go and research what the term funding facility is because it is in capitals. Are keeping funding costs low and assisting with the supply of credit to households and businesses. The board will maintain highly accommodative settings as long as required and continues to consider how further monetary policies could support the recover. It will not increase the cash rate target until progress is being made towards full employment, and it is confident inflation will be substantially within the 2 to 3% target band. Goes on to end. There you go, right? They are not giving negative interest rates at this point. And think about it. The banks need to change all the lending. Everything needs to change before they give these negative interest rates. So hang in there because they're on their way. In the meanwhile, they're just printing money and giving money. Here's $1,500 for JobKeeper. Here's 25 grand stimulus package. Here's a 50 grand PAYG package to keep your business operative. There's so many stimulus packages out there. It's absolutely amazing. And, we haven't even seen the start of this yet. We haven't seen commercial real estate fall yet. We haven't seen, other areas of the market needing to be bailed out. These things will either fall and get smashed, or they will be so printed over, manipulated, and go to all new time highs. But the value of your money and the purchasing power will disappear from your pocket. So on that note, let's go on to read this article. I went into Google the other day and typed in Simone just asked, for us suckers that are still employed, do you think we will see our wages inflate to keep up with everything else? I think we will eventually see our wages get inflated, but maybe not in a short period of time. They'll just keep printing money, and systems will be manipulated. I went on to Google this the other day. It's just an article. I just typed into Google, and I encourage you to type into Google. And what I typed into Google is Australia a corporation? Right? Is Australia a corporation? Just Google it. Right? You've got a phone, you've got a device, you're watching me here. Go Google, is Australia a corporation? And then it'll take you to the first thing. And it looks like CLRA, Community Law Resource Association. I was going to read the first thing that comes up in Google. And I wouldn't even dare to tell you to type in 13 bloodlines of Artie, something illuminating in before that, right? It'll come to the CIA website. But anyway, spot the difference. Here we have currency here. We have just seen our notes. I don't have any commie notes in my pocket. I don't have pieces of plastic with dead criminals printed on me at the moment. But here we have, we've just seen recent currency getting reprinted before this happened. Then it goes on to say, spot the difference. Always said, by the way, that we will not see a new $100 note. They will suspend $100 notes. They will not print it. This was from 3 years ago. I said, expect the $5, the $10, the $20, the $50, but no $100 notes, because they started removing the highest denomination notes out of Europe, out of India. This currency control has been happening for many years now. But anyway, goes on to read. This is an article from the 24th of April 2016. Is Australia a corporation? Goes to read 1973, the birth of corporate Australia and the death of the Commonwealth of Australia. Right? I'm not a legal person, so subject to privilege for all the lawyers that are out there. But But yeah, it goes on to read, the year is 1973. It was the year of that the US ceased its decade-long offensive in Vietnam. The year of the final moon landing, the US dollar devalued by 10% in a single day. The US dollar got devalued by 10% in a single day. Wow. I wasn't born in 1973. The Watergate scandal was top news. OPEC doubled the price of crude oil. Why did they double the price of crude oil in one day? Right? Sounds like what happened back in 1933 with the Gold Confiscation Act. That's a whole other story here. It goes on to say the Queen Elizabeth of England visited Australia capital city on a special mission of great importance and signed a new secret act in the force inside Parliament House. More on that later. 1973 was also the year that money died. So there is two different notes here. I'll talk to you about it. I don't have any of these. I do have some, but they are not here with me right at the moment. I have this shit stored everywhere, but it goes on to see if you go pull up a 1972 $1 bill, you go pull up a 1974 $1 bill, and it will read, one will read the Commonwealth of Australia, one will just say Australia on the top of it. Right? It goes up until 1966. Australian used pounds and shillings and pence. Each pound's note was inscribed with the words legal tender guaranteed by the Crown and the Commonwealth of Australia. On the 14th of February, as I said, going back about 3-4 months ago, I did a video on this at Facebook Live where I talked about on Valentine's Day, everyone got screwed on Valentine's Day, but it wasn't in a fun way from their spouse or whoever they were seeing in that date. They were screwed for their currency. Pounds to the pence to the dollars and the cents was the advertising back then. And there were ads everywhere. Each new dollar bore an inscription saying that the note was legal tendered throughout the Commonwealth of Australia and the territories in the Commonwealth. The notes were all denominated and titled under the heading Commonwealth of Australia. Hooray! A few years later in 1973, with zero ceremony, zero announcements, no TV commercials, the dollar notes were changed again. This time the notes were a new inscription saying that the note was legal tender throughout Australia and its territories. So what happened to the Commonwealth? Well, first, look for the word Commonwealth. It does not mean the Queen or England. The Commonwealth is the common people, you and me, and their wealth, silver, gold, real estate, basic property, and the work of your hands and your labour. The original British pounds used in Australia prior to 1901, before the Federation of Australia, that is, in 1901, and we had the celebration of the Federation of Australia in 2001, and it's probably about 119 years since that occurred. Were backed by physical gold and guaranteed the reigning monarch of England. I don't have any on me at the moment. Sometimes I carry around, sometimes I throw around for people to learn and educate themselves with. Is that the currency that we were using was actually gold coins and silver coins. And I will get onto another article of that very, very shortly, which takes us back to the biblical era. Australian banknotes from 1901 to 1973 included a guarantee from the Commonwealth which assured the receiver that the note, they could not exchange the note for gold, then they would be assured that the slave workers of Australia would provide some form of value through giving up their work or property to honour the paper debt. In 1973, the common people and their wealth were removed all from the Australian currency. This means that the common people are no longer liable for their debts incurred by the government, and B, the common people were no longer able to benefit by the wealth created by their government. Effectively, you are on your own. The government will not look after you and not here to help you, and you cannot trust them. It goes on to read in this article. It goes on to read a lot more about it. Basically saying that it seemed the original country government Commonwealth organisation known as Australia may have declared itself bankrupt between the period of 1929 and 1934, which was when the Gold Confiscation Act of 1933 came into play. During the Great Depression, there were no GFC-like corporate bailouts back then. So in the RBA statement that we just saw, they were talking about this is the biggest thing since the Great Depression back in 1930s. However, it's very, very different because they just print their way through it. Back in the day, they didn't have the ability to print money. Their bailouts back then, and you would either have to go bankrupt or borrow heavily from another nation, thus making yourself subservient to them. Just as a billionaire would close down a troubled company and start a new one, the ruling class of Australia registered a new company with a similar name in 1934 to continue operations while not having to settle its old debt. Interestingly, it seems now that they're that the new Commonwealth of Australia, registered in DC, Washington DC, in 1934, may have been set up by the creditors of the old Australia. There was a new one that had occurred in 2008, which was for a different sort of policy. Anyway, I can read this all night to you. You might fall asleep. There's a lot to it, but I just thought I'd share it with you. It is in Birchfeed. If you do want to go and look at it later, just type in "Is Australia a Corporation" and go and read a little bit about that. On those bond yields that we were looking at beforehand, something very interesting had happened. We were looking at the 3-year bonds that the RBA person was talking about. If we have a look here, they have been falling, and that is absolutely flat at the long end. I'll put this in the Birchfeed for you guys to look at. Things have been going back down and sideways. I can't show it too greatly there. Now, I feel, what are we seeing at the moment? Where are we going to in the future? Personally, my opinion is that we are heading into some new form of industrial revolution where people were taxed, slaved, and pushed into submission into the industrial revolution. I wanted to share this article before I go on to the main topic of this evening, which is something I put in the Birchfeed the other day, which is really important to look at, because you can see the same sort of things have occurred throughout history beforehand. They have occurred in Australia's history. The money changing, how the money changed hands beforehand. Everyone felt like they still had a dollar, but one little word was left out, how the money looked, how it felt, what the money was in. If it was a contract beforehand, it's no longer a contract. It can only play inside this closed circuit, like an iPhone charger can only connect to an Apple product, whereas an external USB-C or whatever could connect to any other sort of device. We went from an open circuit to a closed grid system. This one here is an article, and I will try and get my hands onto. I have some currency which is not even in this state. I'll try and get some sent over, which is very old sort of currency. There's a currency called the denarius. It's actually in the Bible as well. The denarius. It is that old. It is a very ancient. It's a Roman. For those of you that have heard the fall of the Roman Empire, the denarius was the currency in choice at the time. It reigned for a couple of hundred years. Was moved around and manipulated. And I want to share with you what has occurred in the fall of the Roman Empire and what is occurring right now in front of us with our dollars and our currency that we've been using. I did post this article once again to Birchfeed the other day. The monetary crisis, the end of the denarius. If memory serves me correctly, inside the Bible there was a guy called Judas that sold Jesus to his death for 30 pieces of silver denarius. These coins, I do have some from all different ages because they have different silver contents to them. I will try and get them one day and get them around to be able to show you. So I'll see if someone can post them for the time being over to me so I can share with you the denarius. But it goes on to read, every second the government debt of the United States of America increases more than $35,000. So every second, since I just said it last time, so within 10 seconds, that's $350,000 that's been printed. Every American is burdened with more than $60,000 worth of government debt, and yet the dollar is functioning, and this has been functioning for more than 230 years. This article is years old, right? If we printed it, the 2020 version would see that there'll be a lot more debt and enslavement for the people. Jacob E goes 1971. 1971 was the birth of the petrodollar, as when the currency became debt. Yes, that is correct. Right, and these things all happened over a decade. So just be very careful when we look at it. Right, 1966, the pound is the pence to the dollars and the cents. 1971, the US dollar that came off the Bretton Woods system, and Henry Kissinger. You got to think about these people, right? Henry Kissinger's like 100 years old and he's fat, right? Normally when people are 100 years old, they're very frail and whatnot. What are these people having? What are they eating? What are they drinking? right? What makes them that size? That's a separate story, right? These people, he's still kicking very strong, unfortunately, right? These people should all rot in hell. But in 1971, Kissinger took the world off the Bretton Woods system, which was created many decades beforehand at the start of the Industrial Revolution, and turned us into the petrodollar, which is what we have today, which is basically the US as the base currency of the world. We've got to ask who created, who put these things onto certain platforms, and what was their agenda, and how did it play out, and is this something where we're seeing a policy shift, and may go from a US and the superpowers to be in some sort of little nation, which is in other parts of biblical text, do decide to make another nation a superpower, right? And if we look at it, for those of you that have an issue with China or whatever the case may be, I'm not here to talk about what a nation is doing or whatever, but these guys are working like dogs. They deserve, if they're working, they're putting out their man hour, they're changing their man hour for currency, they will naturally grow large and healthy. The US economy, they are living on a credit card, and that is unsustainable. Always talk about sustainability. It is unsustainable, the system that we have in place at the moment. The denarius, it came to power as being a gesture of defiance and pride in war against Hannibal. Despite the economic crisis, the Romans introduced a new currency shortly before the year 211 BC, so before Christ. The denarius was independent of all monetary systems. It consisted of almost pure silver and weighed 4.2 grams. The denarius, these are little coins, like a 5-cent piece is what they look like. It's you can buy them on eBay and stuff. Watch out for fakes and that. But you can get little denarius. They could be in the hundreds of dollars, into $1,000, depending on the quality of them. The ones that I got, which I need to get sent to me, I might show them to you next week if I can get them posted in, and I can post them back and share with you what they actually sort of look like. The denarius followed the Roman troops, first on small scale and then on a larger one. The Roman money supply increased tenfold during the 100 years after the capture of Macedonia in the middle of the 2nd century BC due to its rich silver deposits. During the 1st century BC, the denarius was so omnipresent that there was no need for any more to specify where it had come from. The legend Roma disappeared. It was around the turn of the eras that denarius was the most important currency in the entire Roman Empire. It did not only circulate in all Roman provinces, but also everywhere the Romans were trading. The Roman mint produced millions of denarii every year. The money demand was high after all. The biggest element of the expenditure was the army. Every year it swallowed 100 to 120 million denarii in times of peace. During war, the sum would rise drastically. In addition to the cost, with the cost for constantly expanding the administration, supposedly the costs were in circa of 13 million denarii under Augustus, but during the middle of the 2nd century AD, they had risen to 19 million. Crop donations, official buildings and streets, infrastructure projects, and the games probably took up between 5 and 15 million denarii. In all Roman state thus had to raise 130 to 140 million denarii. This worked out fine during normal years. The earnings roughly covered the expenses. But what if there were higher costs to defray? Debt was not an option. No Roman emperor ever took on a loan. If it became apparent that the expenses would exceed the recipients, the princeps would take special measures. He would often contribute sizable funds from his personal assets, or he would auction off superfluous treasures from the palace. Sometimes he would raise a non-recurring special tax, and if that was not enough, he would lower the silver content in the denarii. So just be very, very crucial as what that just said. They would lower the silver content in the denarii. The denarii was not a currency that was estimated according to fineness or weight. After all, they were accounted and they were minted al marco. Al marco means that certain amount of silver has to equate to a certain number of denarii. Individual pieces could weigh less or more. Nevertheless, 100 denarii still remained 100 denarii. The silver content was no relevance for that. Nero made use of when it's financing rebuilding the city after Rome had burnt down. He drastically reduced the fineness of the denarii, and no one really cared. The denarii worked the same way it had before. Later on, other emperors were also faced with financial gaps, especially since the individual emperors had bought the loyalty of the army by raising their pay. In 84 AD, Domitian raised the regular pay by a third. Septimius served double in at 197. His son Caracalla added another half in 212. Thus, the amount of annual cost rose to 600 million denarii. So we're starting to see the currency get eroded here and inflation take on. Later on, other emperors also faced financial gaps, especially since individual emperors had bought the loyalty of the army by raising their pay. In 84 AD, Domitian raised the regular pay by a third. Septimius served doubled in 197. His son Caracalla added a half in 212. That's what we just read. In order to be able to mint that many coins, the silver content was reduced. While the denarius had contained 3.65 grams in the late Republic, its finest sank to close to 1.5 grams of silver during Cancella times. Towards the end of his reign, Cancella introduced a new coin that doubled the denarius. The numismatics say was equivalent to 2 denarii, but only had contained half as much as 1.6 denarii. Nonetheless, there was no inflation, or shall we say, no major inflation at the beginning of the 3rd century. The inflation rate was approximately 1%. This is about half the rate of ECB is aspiring to for Europe. The reason for this was probably a large number of territories, Roman Empire, blah, blah, blah. But in 235 AD, Maximus Thrax doubled the pay for the legionaries once more. Thus, the national deficit increased dramatically, and no emperor afterwards reigned long enough to consolidate the state budget. Once again, one took to debasing the money. Denarii and whatever the other guy's name is contained less and less silver. Basically, the fall of the Roman Empire came down from monetary creation. I'm saying you take breaths. The currency was destroyed over that period of 100, 200 years. We are literally sitting here in 2020 watching our currency being debased. People are going to see the value of their currency disappear in front of them. Asset prices will rise, debt will become irrelevant, the writing's on the wall. On that note, guys and girls, I'm just going to read some of your questions. Yeah, cool. Want to get to the original topic for this evening's talk is about what I wish I had have known when I was younger. Did I have a mentor? What did I learn at the start? And all those sorts of things. So quite often, people will ask me, Nathan, did you have a mentor? Who was your mentor? All that sort of stuff. And to answer that, there was no internet back in 1998. To answer that, there was no internet connection. There was no websites. Ability to obtain data was very, very different back in late 90s, early 2000s. I was born in 85, 98, I was 13 years old. That's when I started getting excited about property, and I started collecting the Homes Pictorial, they were called. They were like a magazine. I think I got one laying around here somewhere. I was actually featured in one like years ago. And I got these magazines every week. I'd pick them up when I was sitting at the train station, coming home from school. I'd be reading, I'd be like, I want to buy some properties, right? Rich people have properties, wealthy people have properties. I come from a poor family. When I say poor, I'm not like, give me food stamps or anything like that, but my family were just blue collar, average Aussies, working hard, no silver spoon in my mouth. And I always thought to myself, I don't want to be like that, right? I failed every grade from kindergarten to year 9 at that point in time. I can read some of my reports sometimes and share them with you because they'll be fun. And I got just miserable marks, and I thought to myself, most people are working like a dog to earn 40 grand a year if they're lucky, right? An expensive and wealthy person will be earning $50,000 or $60,000 a year back in the early 2000s, late 1990s. And I thought to myself, rich people had property, how can I get property? And it fascinated me. I was collecting currency in 2000, 99, 2000. I'd take my savings and buy some money, and as people would call it money, but currency as as it would really be called. But the dollars that I was buying and the different types of currencies that I was buying from over the years, I sort of wanted to know what I was buying. I started looking into them, but when I was about 14 or 15, I thought to myself, if I had 10 properties and I was able to not have to work, that'd be really cool. And I sort of worked out a plan. Like for about 5 years, I couldn't sign a contract until I was 18. I worked hard, saved every cent that I could. Had about 35 grand saved. Couldn't buy a property. I was like 2002. I was 17 years old. I bought my first car that was cash. It was like a brand new car. I bought some little crap cars that I buy for like $100, $200, flipped them and made some money. But I bought my first car that was brand new, had maybe like 20 grand left over, saved up, got it back to about 35 grand a year later, and then bought my first property. That property was in Mount Druitt in West Sydney, and then I went on to buy more properties out there. And what actually tempted me to want to purchase those properties was just trying to seek to be wealthy and have cash flow coming through. I didn't even know terms like, someone said something about an affirmation. I didn't even know what it was. I had to ask them when I got my first job, what's an affirmation? What is that, right? And I was like deprived of knowledge when I was younger. Probably the best thing that you could get for education was in Carter 96 or something like that. And looking at, knowledge, trying to find that knowledge was very, very difficult. So all of it was written on pieces of paper. My school diaries I used to write how much I could earn and save and whatnot. And there was no sort of mentor. My older brothers, they had bought properties. They were like in their 20s or 30s. They were much older than me. They were like 20 years older. And I was like, they bought a property. I want to buy a property. So I just kept hustling and had a vision of buying 10 properties by the age of 30. And I thought it was impossible. I had never heard of anyone buying properties. However, I thought it must be possible to do so, and I wanted to go do so. I worked out a formula that if I could buy one property a year for 10 years, I was 17, 18 when I bought my first one. I knew what I was going to buy, got my cash ready, bought my first property. I was at the peak of the 2003 property market, and the markets were crashing, interest rates were rising, and things were going not so great. And I bought my first property, not knowing what I was doing. And I bought it below market value in Western Sydney. It was pretty rough out there, and it still is in a lot of pockets. But I bought my first property just with a hope and a vision and a dream. And I see so many people nowadays, and I see back in the 90s, lots of people out there trying to spruik and scam people. And scams back in the late 90s, early 2000s were different to now because people didn't have access to resources. There was no internet, there was no Google, there was nowhere to go and verify information, and people were being flown around, sold things off the plan. I saw someone buy a couple of properties, and I thought to myself, like, they got flown away interstate. The person was wearing a suit. I overheard a part of the conversation. It was like a sales presentation, like some Amway thing going on. And I was like, these guys are going to get ripped hard. And I was like 15 years old, and I was only a kid. People didn't want to listen to me. They were caught up in the show of it, whatever. They went on. I don't even know what happened to those properties afterwards, but they're probably, maybe what they paid for them today would be what their worth is. And looking at, how to get advice was very difficult back then. But I had a strategy. It was very, very clear on how I wanted to get to where I wanted to be. It was a foolproof strategy. It took me 5 years of running numbers, prognostication, seeing things that were happening in the market. And I was fortunate enough to see, I was unable to buy anything, but I was fortunate enough to see a property boom and bust in front of me before I was able to buy a property. And I just wanted to run out there and buy a property. And I thought to myself, with a lot of fear hat on, was like, if things go wrong, how am I going to cover this? How am I going to pay for the property if the market falls, if interest rates go up, if there's not enough rent, if the tenant trashes the property? And they're all good questions to have out there. To answer, most important question, did I have a mentor? No, I didn't. I never had a mentor. I went to a couple of property expo things back in the day, and I used to walk around. I remember I asked someone, they were selling these units. They were like motel units in Perth back in the day. It was someone selling like a Ridges or something like that, and they were like, "Oh, come over here, buy this thing." And I was like, "Oh, tell me." And I just felt like, I was getting scammed. Um, and with I'm just seeing some of the comments coming through, and I was thinking, I asked the guy the question, like, do you own any of these properties? Like, how many of these do you have? Like, how successful are you? And the guy said, no, I don't have any. And I was thinking, you've flown from a different state to try and flog these things, right? You don't own any, right? You're not successful. Like, what are you doing? What are you doing out there? Like, why are you trying to sell these things? And I just saw, you know, a problem there. And I never bought things that were new. I never bought things that were shiny. I never bought things that were off the plan because I had a bit of a fear based on that. And I've developed a strategy: buy 10 properties by the age of 30. Those 10 properties could produce me 50 grand a year. 50 grand a year was more than what the average Aussie was earning at the turn of the millennium. And that would have been very happy for me as a 18, 19-year-old building my property portfolio starting off. But there was no way to go and find the information. I couldn't go and hit up someone and say, hey, Google, hey, is there a video on this, right? Hey, is there, you might go to a seminar, but those seminars are always out there to try and sell you something. So looking at, some of the things that I learned, I never actually made a massive hit. Like there's no deal that, I bought and it turned into a lemon. There's a few that, have had their issues, like ones that have burnt down and stuff like that, some that have been in rough areas. But, when a property burns down, last year I had a whole pile of properties burn down, occasionally get investigated from, insurance companies because they're like, you had a property burn down, what happened? Which I'm happy about. If they're burned down, they're burned down. And, I've been paid out from insurance on that. So when things go wrong, have you got a strategy or a buffer in place? And that's something I thought at the start, is making sure that I had the parameters set right. So I wanted to make sure, what was the property I'm buying for? Do I have clarity of how that property is going to get me to my goal? What is the property going to do? And still to this day, every time I go to buy a property or make any decision, whether it be a business decision, an investing decision, I think to myself, how's this action that I'm going to take today going to help me get me closer to where I want to be? Is it going to take me away from that? Is it going to, get me closer to where I want to be? And, the properties were all just a vehicle to get me to where I wanted to be. Fortunately, touch wood, I've never bought properties where the prices have sunk. I've seen thousands of people that have. I've bought like 10,000 properties for myself and for other people over the years. I talk about that I've got over 200 properties. I don't calculate the properties that I've sold and don't own anymore, that I've flipped. I may have flipped maybe 50, 80, 100, don't know, I don't count them. They just perform a task and I offload them if I go down that road. And I don't calculate properties that I have purchased under other people's names as surrogates for carrying those properties. So there are people out there that do own parts of properties that I own with other people that they just purely own under their name in order to perform a task. So I don't count them into my portfolio, and they're just a speculative sort of play on that front. So all of my properties that I own them myself. I don't have any parties that I'm invested with. If I do buy some, occasionally I buy stuff and I say, look, you hold on to it. When it's finished, we sell it in 2 years, 5 years, 10 years, whatever the case may be. We'll settle the tab at that point. Here's the money, go do it, and whatnot. Before anyone starts hitting me up saying, I want to go buy properties with you, I don't do it. It's just something that occasionally I've done it to people that are around me, more for flipping coins at the local pub or whatever. Not that I go to the pub and not that I drink. I've got here Instagram's ending. I'm going to end it and bring you guys back into the live in 2 seconds. Story. Instagram live is back in action. So yeah, looking at some of the decisions that I've taken over the years, and where I've lost out mainly in my portfolio. Probably the biggest part of my money that I've lost, or things that have gone wrong for me. I often think about this, and I think about when I'm driving to my office, because I see stuff on the way to the office, and I'm like, imagine if I had have made this decision 10 years ago or 15 years ago or whatever. But I could only do what I could do on the day. I drive through Mount Druitt and I have so much regret. I wish I owned more properties in Mount Druitt. I get depressed when I drive through Mount Druitt. But what I've got to remember is that I did the best that I could do on the day when building out that portfolio in Mount Druitt. The biggest regrets that I have are mainly the ones that are based on opinions, but they're not justified via logic and justified via the decisions that I've taken. I feel like I've left a lot of money on the table over the years because I haven't said things that I probably should have. As far as jumping on a deal I'm scared or whatever. One of the things that sort of comes to mind very vividly, Michael says, yeah, the Drury. Very vividly is I remember I was buying a property and I thought to myself, I had like 50 grand left over after doing the deal. I thought to myself, if I didn't if I did this deal and it didn't go to plan, I could end up as a bank repossession, because there was lots of bank repossessions in the early to mid 2000s. And yeah, with this property, I could have sold it. That property was worth like 700,000. Could have bought it for 200,000, a 2-story, 5-bedroom house, but I didn't do it because I was fearful, and I wasn't right. So do I regret not doing that deal? I did the best that I could on the day, and it got me to where I was on the day. However, the opinions of things that cost me a lot more than wrong deals. A lot of regrets out there. I also see a lot of people out there on the flip side of it that make decisions which cost them a lot of money in the short term. Or in the long term. I've talked to people that have bought properties that are worth half of what they paid years ago, could be worth a quarter or a tenth of what they were paid. People that have just gone along and been picked up by most of the time where I see problems with people is where they bought a property brand new, off the plan, from a spruiker company or whatever. And these companies, as I said beforehand, in the 90s, they came around with people with suits. They'd fly to a different state. They would, chaperone you in a BMW or whatever the case may be. However, nowadays they come in the format of buy this dual occupancy, this dual key thing. It's new. You get a rebate. I saw one today. Someone said that you get a free car when you buy a property. And it's like, well, who's paying for that car? Who's paying? Where's the money that's built into the deal? So, yeah. Some of the things that I wished that I knew at the start that would have changed my life greatly. One would have been finance, understanding finance a lot more at the start, and how money works, and how the banking system works, and how inflation works, and how the whole economy works, because it could have alleviated a lot of that fear. And I think my purpose for sharing with you guys on a weekly basis, the Tuesday night chats, with me sharing with you guys on Birchfeed, just content I come across on a day-to-day basis. Some of it may not make sense at the minute. Some of it may not, fit in. It's like, why is this here, right? But in the future, you may go, shit, I remember I saw or heard something about that, and, enlighten you to be able to lead you to something. So I do try my best to throw a lot out there, to awaken people a lot more from just, a self-fulfillment perspective. I wish I understood how interest rate policy worked. Back in the early 2000s, interest rates were going up, 10% interest rates, right? A lot of you wonder why. A lot of you may wonder why, and this is saved in my phone, why I look at this chart all the time. And I post this chart in Birchfeed a lot. What it is the 30-day interbank cash rate futures and the implied yield curve, and working out what the 1-year and the 3-year bonds have anything to do with the financial markets. Back in the mid 2000s, I was fearful because everyone was in my ear telling me, what about if interest rate rise to 15% or 20%, etc., etc. And I used to think to myself, interest rates could go up. I fixed my interest rates at 9%, right? 9% I fixed my interest rates. I think maybe 9.65 or something like 5 years. Right, 5 years I was fearful that it was going to go broke. Something could go wrong. Interest rates could go all the way up, but I didn't know exactly how currency worked and how the liquidity worked in the system and how interest rates worked. And I spent a lot of time, regretting that, because it was like interest rates suddenly went down to 5% or 4%, and I would have been in a very different position had I not have fixed my rate. So I try to be ahead of the market by teaching myself knowledge and seeing what's happening out there now, and not behind the market. So yeah, there's lots of things that, I probably did screw up. And certainly by seeing other people and, as a part of the Be.Invested community, I've seen some really tremendous stories that have occurred over the years, and outcomes that have occurred for people. And I often think back to myself, you see like a builder and their house is half built. You see a mechanic and they drive a shit car and it's like half rockety because they look after everyone else's car, but they don't look after their own car or their own house or whatever the case may be. I often think to myself, if I had the knowledge, right, when I've seen people that have been able to do cool results, they have taken away the I've been able to help them from not making those silly mistakes that I've done over the years. Not that I've made massive mistakes. I see so many people which are look at their their I don't have a piece of paper. I look at I have a form basically when I speak to my investors when I do a map session. Is looking at their position. Some people I talk to them like, man, like I wish I could give you some better advice than what I can today because you've screwed yourself up. You're going to just have to wait and hope that the market will do things to help you recover from the decision. So some people can be locked out of the market for a decade. People could be locked out of the market for a decade and not be able to do anything. And fortunate enough for me, I've always been the deal aspect 100% on the money. As for the opinion or the monkey on the shoulder at the early days, I saw fear and all that. Some people's portfolios, like my office manager in the office, Linda, she got grilled by Koshy one day. Koshy's still having to go to work and spruik his own wares on Sunrise, but he laughed at Linda because she had a couple of $1 million worth of debt. He wasn't educating people about how money worked. He wasn't educating or helping the situation out there for anyone in Australia. But why would you trust anything on TV? But this guy here laughed at Linda. She went and bought 10 properties in 6 months. Right? Linda was able to change her own position, and she's got a really beautiful story. I'm not going to go into it too much because it's her personal story, but she was able to buy 10 properties in 6 months. I've seen a migrant buy 100 properties. A migrant buy 100 properties in a matter of less than a decade. Right? I have seen property investors go from zero, came to with 0 properties, and then they're at like 70 properties. I've seen 25-year-old and 30-year-olds with 25, 30 properties that have built their portfolios. There's one guy who's got, I don't even know how many properties he's got now, but I remember he had 25 at like 27 or something like that. And, it was really cool to see him be able to do that. And I helped him build that portfolio in, a fraction of the time it took me to build my portfolio. Like 2 or 3 years to build out that portfolio, where it took me 5, 6, 7 years to get to that point. So yeah, like I guess if there was someone there that could tell me and guide me and coach me at the time, it would have been more beneficial. But I sort of had to go through all those hard knocks myself, where other people didn't have to. Certainly go down those roads. I had a lot of people telling me their opinion, and I always thought to myself, if I take your advice, I'm going to end up like you because you've taken your own advice in life. So, be very careful with who's talking in your ear. I was talking to someone the other day, and they've listened to a family member. They trust them. They love their family member, etc. However, that family member's fearful and has held this person back. Just seen a message here from Jono. Last week you were right. Sales have picked up in Queensland. A real estate agent has told me so. Look, there's you can see when you hop online in many different states. I'm not going to go and give away all of the locations of where I buy and stuff like that. However, if you go and look at properties that are on the market in realestate.com or wherever, you will see that there's a lot more coming up that are under contract. I have never seen the market as hot as what it is in 2020, right? And it's just due to stimulus packages being printed and lack of stock and lots of different variables there. But getting back to topic, I want to try and keep this on point. I think that most of the deals that I get upset about are the ones that I didn't make. I drive past properties and I'm like, I should have bought this. I didn't do this. I could have pushed finance further. Right? Like those of you that know me and all that, like I've stretched the parameters of being able to try and, you know, I'm carrying like, so I've got a really bad back, by the way. I have to go to the chiro and the osteo every week. And yeah, I always joke about it. Right? I like carry the world on my shoulders. That's why my back is sore. It's not really. I've got a large torso, and it's just the way that I sit and whatnot. Um, but yeah, I've pushed at every parameter to try and overcome those hurdles. But I've seen other people that have just gone when they've got to certain levels and checkpoints. I'd love to see someone get more properties and more assets than what I have in whatever capacity they want to do. I haven't been able to see it. I know how hard it has been to get there. Nothing in life ever easy. Worthwhile is ever easy, as my mate John would tell me. But yeah, I look at I forget what I was going to say. Yeah, most of the decisions that I get upset with are the ones that I didn't do, and I've got to always remind myself that don't beat yourself up. You did the best that you could on the day. Got a lot of questions here. I'll answer some of the questions shortly. If I look at my property portfolio over the years, they've all sort of done their purpose, right? So some properties have outperformed more than others. In an ideal position, my portfolio would consist of all unit blocks that are owned completely outright, or shopping centres, or that they'd be consistent of acreage sites. But my portfolio is consisted of regional properties, renovation properties, big commercial properties, small properties, houses, and acreages. They've all performed in different ways, and that's important to understand when you're accumulating the properties and putting them in your portfolio. How is the property going to help you get to where you want to be and fit into that equation? Had some little notes here, guys. I've seen, I guess, like from a mentor perspective, as I said beforehand, I have seen on one side where people have done things wrong. I've seen on the other side where I've always tried to steer away from that. So if I had a mentor, it wasn't one sort of mentor, it was people that have done things that have screwed up. Ultimately, at the end of the day, why I started investing was to buy properties to support my lifestyle, so I didn't have to go and waste 40 years of my life working at a job that I didn't want to have to do. And that's, was a motto of why I did what I did. That's why the slogan of B.Invested is live life on your terms, because I wanted to replace my income so I could do what I want, when I want, how I want. And, even in business, I could be more polished and I could have more people coming to me because they're like, Nathan, he's too far out there, or whatever the case may be. But I do what I want when I want, because that's, the lifestyle that I've sort of created as well. And I think that everybody should, be working towards their own personal sort of goals at all points in time, and have clarity on that goal as to how you're going to be able to go and achieve that. Some of the things that I did have at the start, I had processes in place. I prognosticated, not procrastinated, prognosticated. I wanted to see where I would be in the future. I tried to model and see where the properties would go to over a period of time. I wanted to check in and see if I bought this property and it went in this direction, how could it be? If I bought this property and went into this direction, where could it be? What are the risks that are supporting this? As I was saying beforehand, mining areas and mining towns, if you look at commodity prices, what's going to be happening in these markets. So, there's sort of things that you need to factor in when doing deals. I planned, I budgeted, I had a budget from the age of 13. For those of you that I help out from a buyer's agency perspective, or even if you use another buyer's agency, they've probably ripped off my cash flow modeling software. I created my Excel file that most of you see when I was 13 years old in Microsoft Excel 98. So, it's just a bit more funkier looking nowadays. But I ran my numbers in Excel and formulated cells. And still to this day, I'm looking at my screen. I've got about a dozen Excel files open, and they're just little things that I look at on a daily basis to make sure that I'm on check, and portfolios and different assets and my property portfolio and whatnot are all doing what they need to be doing, and it's good to have those numbers there. I reverse engineered what could occur. So a lot of the times I see these properties where people have paid too much. What makes me feel very comfortable when buying assets? A lot of people get fearful. I'm a contrarian investor. I go for the opposite of what's happening. So if a property market is hot, I don't want to be buying in it. If it's very depressed, that's when I want to be taking advantage of that. Jezza, thanks. Good night, mate. Good night. And sorry I'm here so late on Tuesday nights, but I love just sharing the news. But I always think to myself, if someone has paid $500,000 for a property and I can pick it up for $200,000, all I have to do is buy that property for $200,000, wait for some idiot, i.e. that person that paid beforehand, to come back to the market and pay that price again. If someone has paid it beforehand, there's a very good confidence that all we have to do is wait for that environment to return. What caused that environment back in the day to occur, and what would cause that to occur again in the future, and how could we push that property to get back to that level? So reverse engineering scenarios, reverse engineering the portfolio, and working backwards. Like, I love when I'm buying a property way below what someone else has paid. And I'm not talking about a property because it's a piece of crap. I'm talking about the fact that someone had bought in a more heated market, or the thing is below market value, or they're distressed. And that gives me confidence that someone has been able to pay that beforehand, and I'm able to go and pick it up at a severe discount today. But ultimately, hand in hand, a lot of people think that the property is most important, and people that are out there and people to watch out for in the marketplace, those that are talking buy property, do a property. Someone had actually asked me here something about coming in for a map session. Adam said, "Hey Nath, would you recommend doing a map session or straight into investing?" I don't ever help anyone by buying a property. People don't come on board at B.Invested to buy a property. Importance that they need to have the right strategy, because I'm not going to sign someone up to kill themselves financially. They need to make sure that the property is going to help them achieve their goals. I've just seen a message come through. My chair apparently is rickety. I need to tighten all these chairs off in the background, as I am sitting at my dining table, and these chairs were only put together by hand. There we go. So with watching out there in the marketplace, there's so many people that want to try and sell a property. The property is only part of the strategy. If you have a property and you can't fund that property, you don't have a property. You have an idea and a concept of a property. You need to understand, how is that property going to help you move forward? How is the finance going to help you move forward? What is your finance strategy? How is your debt accumulation strategy? What is that debt going to do for you? How is it going to help me get to my end goal? And they're all sort of questions you need to be asking yourself, is not just necessarily jumping out and buying a property, because you could be buying the wrong property for what you need to occur today in your position. So important to have very, very clear, defined goals. I've always talked about treating my property investing like a business. Treating it like a business. The numbers don't lie. Our emotions can lie. Our feelings can lie. Our thoughts and friends and families and salespeople and whoever else out there in the community can lie to you. You can lie to yourself, but numbers fundamentally do not lie. Numbers need to work. If you treat it like a business, you will be successful with your investing. Most property investors have 1 or 2 properties in their portfolio. Less than 20,000 people have 6+ properties in their portfolio. Fortunate enough, I've probably played a role in getting to know half of those people reaching their 6+ properties in their portfolios. There's a big fundamental difference. 9 out of 10 businesses fail in the first 5 years. If you're looking at property businesses in 2020, most businesses are failing out there. We're in a position where, if you treat your property portfolio like a business, I always used to think about business people, and I didn't know too many business people. I saw shows and people in the news that were business people. I used to think to myself, would this person be doing this task right now to get to that result? There was points where I would do renovations myself. It was sweat equity deals, right? Like, I mean, like ripping apart old houses, taking those parts, putting them into another property, etc., etc. And I used to think to myself, a successful business person wouldn't be doing this. They're not playing with the rats and mice. They're not doing these activities. But it was a start. It was a learning place for me to be. There was no shame in doing the hustle, right? It's either doing the hustle and eating shit when I was 18 years old, or being 50 and having to work two full-time jobs, not because I wanted to, but because I had to. And that was a big difference. That was a big motivator. I had seen people in my life very close to me, very dear to me, that were working too fucking hard for their age. I saw my dad die. I was 16 years old. He had a heart attack. He'd worked two jobs, worked hard, paid off the house, all that sort of stuff. And I was like, that's not something I want to do in my life. I want to enjoy what I'm doing. I want to be able to do things because I want to, not because I have to. And I think, that was a big driver of mine of not having to fall into that sort of trap. I collected data, and I sort of modeled, as I said beforehand, prognostication. I'd model data, and I'd try and forecast as what could happen in the future, and would I be happy with that outcome? Is that data going to get me to where I want to be? It's a bit like if you had a sat, no, I'll call it a sat nav, but your GPS, your Google Maps, whatever you want to call it. If you had a sat nav that's going to calculate each road, the traffic congestion, all that sort of stuff to get you to your destination, or this chair is really annoying, as I heard someone say to me that I need to tighten my chair. But with where I was at back in the day, I used to have to write it down, right? I used to have to write down forecast, model, pen, paper, as I'm putting that ink to the pad. Like, I'm literally seeing, what it would look like, and being able to do that. A lot of people just go out there and buy a property, but, without having full understanding or intent as to what that property is going to do to help them get to their end goal. The other thing, just with writing it on paper and actually experiencing a real world, was very different as well. So when I was sort of forecasting before buying properties, things to me appeared very, very differently to what they appeared after I started purchasing assets, acquiring assets, and investing myself, because it did look very, very different. With that is just some views on where I was coming from at the start. Mentors can help you, mentors can kill you. You want to make sure that if you do have a mentor, how they're going to help you get there. Do they have the capacity? If they can't even get themselves there, how they're going to get you there themselves. So open to questions to you guys. Got some questions here, which I'm going to hop straight into them from Facebook. So Steve asked, hey Nathan, I get how to read the interbank chart, but I don't understand why. Are you able to briefly explain it? So with that interbank cash rate future chart, it's a bit hard to explain now because it's just flat, but back in the past, you would start to see trends that would occur in cash rate futures. So if it was flat and then you started to see from 18 months time that it was coming at a shorter tail end, you could sort of bank into the fact that money and people were being scared, and monetary policy was turning in a different direction, and people were either going in for higher yields or lower yields, and that the returns would come forward at some point in the future at a lot higher or lower rate. We did the event which we were at going back in February last year, and when I said between 90 days and 120 days we would see a rate cut, not before and not after. We would see the first one, which was on the 4th of June last year. That's how I looked at it. At the moment, it has no relevance in the current market. I saw the free car in the property purchase as well. There's lots of scams out there. Lydia, I want 100. Let's go. Can't wait for my map session. Look forward to helping you and chatting to you again, Lydia. Hopefully all is well over there. Big midsection give you back pain, brother. Yes. Hey Birchie, my first investment, I have 50 grand deposit, 300 grand borrowing capacity, pretty crap. Don't be so hard on yourself on that front. Is it better to buy a place that can add value for a bit of faster equity, or just get a property somewhere else in the country and let it do its thing over time? I'm going to use a service if that's better. With it, happy to help out if I can. I do all the locating and negotiation of deals on behalf of my investors. I have a service, a buyer's agency, where I help investors build property portfolios by buying properties that are below market value. Got some water. As for the 50 grand, you said that your 300 grand borrowing capacity is pretty crap. Don't beat yourself up. If you can use that $50,000 and that 300,000 borrowing capacity, you could purchase an asset which would bring extra cash flow that could improve your servicing. So potentially the next one that you buy could be a borrowing capacity of 400,000 and improving that position via adding more cash flow into your profit and loss for the banks and your assets and liability in your ledger for the banks when they assess your loan. So yeah, if you're buying a property today which is got a 300 grand borrowing capacity, in the future that may remain the same. So you could buy this property if the cash flow is so strong, you could possibly go back to the bank and purchase another one. And back in the early days, you used to ask the bank, you can't let me borrow anymore, but what about if I did this? What about if I did that? And children are inquisitive because they're learning and they're growing and they're expanding all the time. But a lot of the time people get told no, and the system just makes us accept no for an answer, and that's it. Do I think about suburbs of Adelaide for growth? I have bought in Adelaide. Not the biggest fan of Adelaide at the moment. I see that there's some other markets which are much more hotter at the moment. But that's not to say that Adelaide isn't a bad place to invest. Luke, do you use software to manage your properties? I actually created a software called My Property Tracker for everyone that's got property. It's like a bookkeeper, some software, all combined into one. It's like a CRM and an account zero where everything goes in the cloud. And it helps out with managing your portfolio and all your bills and all that sort of stuff. Can I sponsor your water bottle? You can if you want. This is just whatever I've got here at the time. Hey Nath, do you see paying LMI as your friend when buying investments, and do you ensure you have a 20% deposit? I've found 20% deposits to be greater over the years because the banks and how they do their serviceability. And if you're working with a bank, the bank and you are having a discussion, the bank may approve your loan and you can do the deal. If you do mortgage insurance, you then bring the mortgage insurance company into the equation. You're doing a deal with the bank, the bank, and now the mortgage insurance company has to do their checks, and that can screw up the deal. So I've found that 20% deposits, without giving financial advice, are much more beneficial for people to build their portfolios more rapidly, out there. Ayapan, hopefully doing well, mate. Great, thank you. Always talk about cash flow. How about Melbourne market now? I've never been a big fan of Melbourne. There's nothing wrong with Melbourne. I don't have it in for people from Melbourne, so if anyone throws hate at me, I just feel that for the same money that you could buy in Sydney, you can do far greater. I look at fundamentals of cities. In Melbourne, you can just drive 10 minutes down the road and build a new city. It is flat. You can just keep going out, and there's all these new towns and cities that are growing. In Sydney, we are gridlocked in the Sydney Basin with national parks and all different stuff like that, and that will affect supply and demand and people to be able to grow. So yeah. On that note, I do need to jet. I was going to keep this into a short, compact. I was trying to get to the hour today, but we're 1.5 hours in, wherever we are, 1.5 hours. So yeah, with it, on that note, if you guys do have any questions, happy to help out. Flick us a message. If you do like what I'm putting out there, smash up the like button, share it with your friends, tag your friends in here, and I will be back next week to give you guys some more info. So thanks a lot, guys. Keep being awesome. Stay safe out there. If you need anything, admin@binvested.com.au. Call us at 1300 367 925. Thanks, guys. Bye for now.